Hello, welcome to the program. Ukraine's defense industry will be at the center of attention on July the 4th at an event called Defense Technologies in Ukraine and the World. Hosting the event is Gurak, a former Deputy Director General of Ukraine's state arms manufacturer UkrOboronprom and now a senior fellow at the Potomac Foundation. Hello, thank you for joining us. So my understanding is that the latest trends in defense technologies will be talked about during this event. Can you expand a bit about it?
Yes, thank you for inviting to talk about this, because I believe that well, the trends that are ongoing now can be a prerequisite for Ukraine to become a world-leading nation in terms of defense technologies and in terms of economy, actually, and in terms of global influence. Why? Is because our main capacity all the time, since I don't know, since decades ago, was a defense R&D and defense production. Basically, we were a third country in the world in terms of quantity of military stuff. We had the third largest army in 91 million people working in defense factories and aerospace factories, which are basically the same. There were a few hundreds of them still remaining, quite a big portion of. And basically, if we talk about Ukraine's future, I see it as a main, R&D hub and high-tech hub for the world, and that's basically, that could be our offer to the world.
So creating some military laboratory equipment, testing of equipment in Ukraine?
It exists, so we have virtually all defense technologies possible, everything that you can imagine, starting from applied sciences schools, starting from mathematics, physics, radio electronic schools, which then extrapolate to, more practical engineering schools. So everything from armored vehicles to space rockets, there is a capability in Ukraine. We are one of 10 countries in the world that have closed cycles of defense production in all these things. So ships, military planes, aircraft, helicopters, tanks, armored vehicles, anything that you can imagine. And well, it's basically, there is no question whether we have something, whether we can do something about it. We just need to do it.
Now, one of the, let me be technical here, one of the features of the recent law on national security is the fact that the defense sector now must be led by a civilian person who doesn't belong to the military sector. How will it ensure that it will help this defense sector? How will it change the defense sector and the defense industry?
Well, it's a long discussion, actually, not only in Ukraine, but in a broader NATO context. And this is a standard, actually, in all NATO countries, also in US, for instance. Why is it needed is to balance the powers. So if you take functions of the defense sector, basically the MOD is the main organization which is coordinating it. It provides for, it should work on logistics and on support of the military operations, so basically bureaucratic work. And, well, bureaucrats are more effective when they see, something from a bit different angle. And that's a standard which proven itself to be effective in other countries, and this was provided actually a few years ago in the document called Strategic Defense Bulletin, which was developed by Ukraine with NATO advisors. It was adopted by a decree of a president of Ukraine, and actually that's a logical consequence that these norms are now in the law. So it's within the next few months, in 2019, in spring, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the defense minister should become a civilian. And that's totally in the logic of all the defense reform and all the reforms which are happening in this sector.
Now, following this idea of raising UkrOboronprom to international norms and standards is interesting, because you've been working for them, and the staff of this defense enterprise has been under fire recently, as the new UkrOboronprom head vowed cutbacks in top management. How to reform that kind of gigantic structure. How to get it from this post-Soviet structure to something more more linked to the norms of NATO and of a new era?
Well, there's very simple logic. We should be governed, Ukraine's defense industry should be governed by the same principles as also in the West as any other basically industry or business, because of course it produces very specific products and it should have some extra regulation in terms of, secure national interest, but from a business point of view it's the same business. So Ukraine's regulation, as of now, still is quite archaic in this domain because, well, the market situation and the global situation in '90s, when the respective legislation was adopted, was quite different from now. Now we need to adopt as fast as possible four basic things to regulate in the international standards. First is production, second is trade, third is procurement, and fourth is corporate things, is corporate governance. So basically, all the legislation for the last 4 years was already developed, and it's actually being awaited to be adopted by the parliament. It needs to be just lodged by the respective authorities, either cabinet of ministers or the president, or maybe some of the MPs. And we now started seeing signals that it should actually, the government and the National Security Council are seeing that this is a big priority. Just last week there were respective releases from the National Security Council that actually the reform will follow.
But now you've quoted 4 points. I could add up one more that is important to reach Western standards, is transparency. And the thing is that yes, of course, there is this national security matter, which implies, of course, a bit of secret, it's normal. But how to reconcile this need for national security and also the transparency needed in a really, really opaque, because it's, to say the least, a really opaque sector?
Well, it's also quite easy. We should just follow the standards adopted in NATO countries. Transparency doesn't mean per se hiding of some things that not need to be seen by the enemy. Transparency means, first of all, just following the norms. Of course, these 4 points which I highlighted, 2 of them actually include this notion of transparency, which is procurement and corporate governance. So procurement is a matter of transparency for the MOD and other security authorities, and corporate governance is a matter of transparency for the industry, actually. So the norms are designed. I don't want to go, too much deep into details, but it's not like there is a discussion what should be done. I mean, everything's for professional people, for experts, for legislators, for government people. It's clear what should be adopted. So now the question is when it would be adopted.
And because now the Ukrainian army is not the same as 2014. Of course, it's better equipped, it's better trained, but still, and you said, you talked about the when, and the when is an interesting question, because recently organizations such as Transparency International still points out the lack of, and you talked about procurement. Actually, procurement is a good example. The fact of when, for example, when a battalion need or a unit need a certain things, it's hard to get from the bottom to the up and to get the proper information, then to get them proper equipment. How to deal with that, and when will it be implemented? When will this? And is there a system, which can clarify the demands from unit or from battalions?
Yeah, there is one. It's not a fast process, because since 90s there was virtually no development until 2014 of legislation and of respective logistics internally within the procurement system of the MOD. These norms were also provided in the in the Strategic Defense Bulletin, and there are respective NATO standards for these requirements to be fastly, lodged before in the hierarchy of the MOD and of the General Staff. The situation has improved a lot since 2014. Because, well, when we first encountered in 2014 the need to provide for the army and quickly, it was really a big mess. So there was basically no system in place, and I can assert that now the situation has improved drastically. So now there is a very good interlink, and a very good cooperation between all the hierarchy, and also MOD is now really working really closely with the legislators, with the government, and with the industry, to put forward the requirements. Basically, it was all provided in the so-called national program for state program for development of armaments until 2020. It's in place. Yes, of course, it has limited access, so it's a secret. But passing just quite easy verification, companies can access that information, also private companies, and that's basically a document, a founding document for the industry to know what MOD will procure in advance.
So it's sort of a guideline too.
Yeah, it's also quite a standard thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in place. So the situation has improved a lot, and it's continuing to improve.
Now you said the date was 2020. To implement this reform completely. How do you see this reform unfold after the election? Do you see this sector continue to that way? Is there a risk that if there's a switch in the election, is there a risk that this reform might stop? Is there what can be the forecast here?
Well, logically, I don't imagine how any political force would want not to continue the reform of defense sector. It's a matter of country's survival, basically. So, and actually, the current political situation is positively influences the reform, and it's very hard to imagine what could stop it. I mean, it's so obvious, it would be a death of any politician, political death, basically. Yeah, to say no, let's switch to something else. Let's not do the reform of defense sector. Right?
And now, on a more to conclude this interview, on a more global point of view, how do you? There's very soon there's going to be a summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russia's President Vladimir Putin. How do you see it influence, and some experts and some observers saw how he sometimes can change his mind with autocrats, with Kim Jong-un, or then there are other examples like that. How do you see this summit influence the U.S. politic over the defense sector in Ukraine, and if he's being convinced to drop, which would be unfortunate, the U.S. help to Ukraine, is the defense sector ready for that kind of?
I think there is no chance something like that could happen, because for U.S. It's a matter of geopolitical interest, and actually it's a strategic need for U.S. to have basically an industrial cooperation with Ukraine in defense sector, because if this cooperation stops, very likely that we will start losing all the potential that is still remaining. People, basically assets like factories, everything will start will go down, and if it goes down, it's a very preferable situation for our enemy, to basically do what they wanted to do back in 2014. So, and if US loses geopolitically or strategically loses Ukraine, I think that could be even considered as the start of the end of basically U.S. global geopolitical influence. So I don't think that
it is not the first time that Trump has surprised its allies on this matter.
Yeah, but look, we can talk that somebody is unpredictable, etc., etc. But there is what differs U.S. from all other countries in the world is that they have systems in place and counter checks and balances system actually also. So national strategy and international politics in U.S. are defined by a very, very big community well, it's all done in the national interest. President of U.S. cannot behave, not in the national interest. And there is basically no such situation that it would be in the national interest for U.S., just to give up on Ukraine.
And so, but just to conclude, would this defense sector be able to and strong enough in any case scenario to develop itself quick and fast?
Well, what we need is investments and resources. There is not enough internal resources, and that's why actually the reform is needed. So, we can speculate, we can, we can't. We were able basically to survive and to rebuild the sector without major help. Of course, there was quite big help from US to the army, basically to the MOD, but to the defense sector, there was not much help. So, because actually it was under-reformed. So, we could survive, of course, because we're very capable in this domain. But it's a speculative topic. It's a matter of geopolitics, and geopolitically, I think we definitely are, within the Euro-Atlantic concept and framework. For a very long-term perspective. So I don't think that's possible to happen at all.
Well, thank you for this overview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio today.
Thank you so much.
This was Denis Gurak, Senior Fellow at the Potomac Foundation. Thank you for watching the program and stay tuned for the rest.